Okay, so my title is very complicated, but it's very simple at the same time. So are you guys ready to write this down? I'll say it a couple times. DNA as evidence for intelligent design, and what DNA says about the designer and the designed. Okay, got that? I'll say it one more time. DNA as evidence for intelligent design, and what DNA says about the designer and the designed. So, life, look around here. Everybody in here is alive, right? Okay, so what is DNA? DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. Can everybody say that, kids? Deoxyribonucleic acid. You see why we abbreviate to be DNA. So DNA is made up of a sugar phosphate backbone, and the rungs of it are made up of nucleobases. Now, not just for the kids, but I made a little double helix. So DNA is made up of these ladders along the edge here. That's a sugar and a phosphate group. And then in the middle here, you can see that there's two different bases. There's two different colors there, right? So each rung, kind of like a ladder, is made up of two different pieces. Now these two different pieces are very selective. There's only 4 pieces that line the whole middle part of DNA. Those 4 pieces are thymine, guanine, cysteine, and adenine. Okay, so, and they're very selective in how they bond. Adenine only bonds with guanine, and cysteine only binds with thymine. So you can see I kind of mimic that down the chain here. Okay, so this is what DNA looks like inside of our cells. Okay, so inside, how many of you guys know how many cells your body has? You're made up of cells. Who wants to take a guess of how many cells make up like an average man's body? Any? Jim? A lot. You want a starburst, Jim? I feel like I'm going to hit somebody if I throw it at you. Should I throw it? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do underhand, okay? Oh, yes. Victory. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so DNA is in each one of our cells, actually inside, so it's a cell, and then inside the cell is a nucleus, and inside your nucleus holds all of your DNA. The average man has about 30 to 40 trillion cells in their body. 30 to 40 trillion cells. So you got thousands, millions, billions, trillions. 30 to 40 trillion cells. And in each one of those cells, you have a nucleus. And inside of each one of those nuclei, actually I think, is Israel, come up here. Stand up here. Yeah. And hold this up. Hold it up so everybody can see. Is 6 feet of DNA. Okay, so you have 30 to 40 trillion cells in your body. Each of those cells has a nucleus inside of it, and inside that nucleus holds over 6 feet of DNA. That's crazy, right? Okay, that DNA has, let me show you. I made a smaller model so you can see more of it. That DNA, each one of these base pairs, it has, let me get this right, 3 billion base pairs. Okay, all the way down. In 2003, I believe, let's see, I think I wrote it down. You can sit down, Israel. Thank you so much. Everybody give him a hand. I think he was actually waiting for candy. I forgot, sorry. If you help me, I will give you candy as well. Okay, so we have 3 billion base pairs. Did I say that already? Yeah. I did say that, okay. And then, okay, I was going to talk about the Human Genome Project. So in 2003, the Human Genome Project completed recording the whole, this whole thing. It took them 15 years to be able to do that, to record the whole human genome. It took them 15 years to do that. That's how big it is. And that's basically them using giant computers calculating nonstop for 15 years. That's how long it took for them to record all of these 3 billion base pairs in order. Out of that, what they found, they thought, because DNA, okay, let me go back. Let me tell you what DNA does. So that's all really cool, but what does it do, right? So DNA contains the instructions needed for an organism to develop, survive, and reproduce. Basically everything, the what of who you are is what your DNA is. To carry out these functions, DNA sequences must be converted into messages that can be used to produce proteins, which are the complex molecules that do most of the work in our bodies. Okay, did you guys get all of that? I'm gonna show you a little video to help reiterate that, okay? Are you good, Ken? All right. Do we have the sound on?
Of all living tissue. In most human cells, there is a structure called the nucleus. The nucleus contains the genome. In humans, the genome is split between 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome contains a long strand of DNA, tightly packaged around proteins called histones. Within the DNA are sections called genes. These genes contain the instructions for making proteins. When a gene is switched on, an enzyme called RNA polymerase attaches to the start of the gene. It moves along the DNA, making a strand of messenger RNA out of free bases in the nucleus. The DNA code determines the order in which the free bases are added to the messenger RNA. This process is called transcription. Before the messenger RNA can be used as a template for the production of proteins, it needs to be processed. This involves removing and adding sections of RNA. The messenger RNA then moves out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm. Protein factories in the cytoplasm, called ribosomes, bind to the messenger RNA. The ribosome reads the code in the messenger RNA to produce a chain made up of amino acids. There are 20 different types of amino acid. Transfer RNA molecules carry the amino acids to the ribosome. The messenger RNA is read 3 bases at a time. As each triplet is read, a transfer RNA delivers the corresponding amino acid. This is added to a growing chain of amino acids. Once the last amino acid has been added, the chain folds into a complex 3D shape to form the protein.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture.
Here is the basic unit of all living tissue.
DNA in our cells is similar to an intricate computer program. Dr. Francis Collins, director of the Human Genome Project, said that you can think of DNA as an instructional script, a software program sitting in the nucleus of the cell. Bill Gates said, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created. The documentary, the clip on the very end of that was from a documentary called Unlocking the Mystery of Life. It's phenomenal. It has a whole bunch of scientists that basically just questioned evolution. They were, years in this, and they're like, it's just not working. And so they came up with intelligent design. But they, in this documentary, it says DNA is the most densely packed an elaborately detailed assembly of information in the known universe. That's pretty crazy, right? So, after they got done sequencing the whole genome, human genome, they were like, okay, we're gonna go through and we're gonna figure out what all this stuff is, and we're gonna find all this stuff, and your body needs about 100,000 proteins to work. So they figured they would find at least 100,000 genes, because genes are just sections. I made a model of genes for you. Genes are just sections of the DNA that then are replicated, and they produce a protein like what you saw there. And so they expected to find at least 100,000 of these, because we have 100,000 proteins that need to be transcribed in our bodies. But what they only found 20,000 genes that transcribe for proteins. So they were surprised at that, because where did the rest of the proteins come from? So they actually figured that some of those overlap. So some of these genes, depending on environment and whatever, transcribe for different proteins, although they're the same. So I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but keep that in your mind. So about 2%, the genes that they have discovered, they know what they make, they understand those parts. Those make up about 2% of our DNA. So about 98% of our DNA, they consider to be junk or unspecified. They thought that this was like evolution, like we just don't need those things anymore. They're still there, but we just don't use them. But what they found when they took, similar animals like mammals and humans, that they thought that the unspecified or the junk DNA would all look the same, because wouldn't it? It just isn't being used anymore, so it just stays there and it's not really harming anything. And as you evolve and get better, then that stuff would all just stay the same. But what they found is junk DNA is very different among very closely related mammals. And so that kind of baffled them, because they thought that the junk DNA would all look the same. So what they're finding is that junk DNA isn't actually junk DNA. It's just DNA that we don't know what it does yet. Surprise! The first cell, so the cool thing about this is the first cell that is ever created of your body had everything in it to create you. It had all the information. One time during the politics, when presidential election, everything was going on, somebody came to our house and they were trying to push political things, and she came in and we talked a little bit, and she said, well, I'm looking at, because we were saying, well, we are pro-life. That's just where we stand. And she was saying, well, I understand that, but I'm pro-choice. And if you look at the science, the reason that I'm pro-choice is because of the science and this and that. And and so I listened to her, and I asked questions, and she never gave me the science. She just kept saying, because of science, I'm pro-choice. Well, so then I just let her talk, and then I'm like, guess what? I have a biology degree, and I love science. And you know what the science is? That the zygote, which is the first cell of your body that ever was, has all of the encoded inscription details of who you are right there in that one cell. It is completely different and unique from your mother and from your father. It is a cell that has never been created in the history of mankind. It has DNA that has never been seen before in the history of mankind. It carries everything that you are right now in that one cell. So the science to me says that it's a human. And she was like, yeah, okay, well, it's nice talking to you guys. And I was like, do you want some water? Do you want us to pray for you? Everything that you are is contained, not everything, the what of who you are. Your brown hair, your brown eyes, or your, whatever color hair you are, your skin color, whether or not you're gonna get certain diseases, sometimes is imprinted in your DNA. We're gonna talk about that a little bit later here. All kinds of stuff is imprinted into your DNA. It's passed down from your parents. Some things, like, have you ever noticed, who was I talking to? Oh, yesterday on the float, a gal goes, oh man, because the kids got out and they were in the middle of our little tubes as we're floating down the river. And she goes, careful kids. And she didn't have any kids, but she's like, oh, careful kids. And then she's like, oh my goodness, I've turned into my mother. And she's like, I always was like, Mom, just let me have fun. And here I am telling these kids that aren't even mine to be careful. But the reality is, a lot of things that we do, we inherited those things because they're in our DNA. We're finding more and more stuff is just in our DNA. Siblings look like each other because they got that from their DNA. Although, if two people had kids, I think the chances of them ever having identical twins, outside of it being like that they were conceived together and all of that kind of normal stuff, is like 3 trillion or something. Like two people have 3 trillion different ways that their DNA could mix together. Isn't that crazy? That's crazy. So, I say all that to say, have you guys ever heard of the SETI Institute? Yeah? Somebody said yes. Okay. It's the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Okay, so they haven't found any life outside of our planet or intelligence outside of our planet, but they keep searching for it. And so this institute actually has devoted itself to finding intelligence outside of our universe. Not universe, but outside of our world, essentially. And so one of the ways that they do this is that they presuppose that information embedded in electromagnetic signals from space would indicate an intelligent source. Right? So if you find something floating around that has some sort of sequence to it, or some you think that might have come from an intelligent source. They break this down more. An information pioneer says, information habitually arises from conscious activity, which we know that, right? Like, information doesn't just appear. Let's see. So mathematician William Dembski explains this. He breaks it down this way. Information or intelligence has to have 2 components, and it can be broken down more, but I simplified it. So it has to have high complexity and specification. Okay, what does it need to have? Where are you at? Just kidding. Yes. So for something to be intelligent, it has to have high complexity or come from an intelligent mind. It has to have high complexity and specification. So both of those things, I'm just going to list out the definition really quick, but then I'm going to give an example. So complex sequences exhibit an irregular and improbable arrangement that defies expression by a simple rule or algorithm. Have you guys ever seen, well, yeah, you have. Rubik's Cubes? Okay, so you can solve Rubik's Cubes just using algorithms. So if you know how to solve a Rubik's Cube, you know that you don't solve it by side, you solve it by layer. It has 3 different layers to it. And when you look at a Rubik's Cube, you know that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of those pieces have the same color on them. And so you can kind of, depending on where those are, you can twist the Rubik's Cube a certain way so many times, right, left, up, left, right, left, up, left, right, left, up, like that's an algorithm. And you can solve a Rubik's Cube that way. So an algorithm is just something that's like kind of mindless. Once you know the sequence, you're like, dun-dun-dun. Yeah, have you seen those kids that can solve it in like 8 seconds? That's crazy. They're like, and it's done. It's incredible. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence. It does. I mean, these kids, but these are little kids that just learn the algorithm for the Rubik's Cubes. So that's what an algorithm is. Specification, so that's complexity. Specification involves a math or correspondence between a physical system or sequence and an independently recognizable pattern or set of function. Okay, that all sounds really crazy. So I'm going to give you an example. Somebody left a typewriter here a couple months ago. Who was it? Somebody left a typewriter here. And A brought it home. He's like, I got a typewriter. I'm like, why? And the kids were like, doot, doot, doot. They loved it. So Israel just got a hamster. Guys, okay, I got to tell you the story of this hamster. I did not want to get a hamster, as some of you might have known. And Israel is very persistent, and he does not give up easily. And so he's like, I got all the money and everything. You know what? We don't have to buy it. Let's just go look. Just go to PetSmart and look. And so I'm like, all right. Because he's like every 5 minutes mentioning the hamster of my life. Like I get up in the morning, hey Israel, how you doing? I'm doing good. Can I get a hamster today? I'm like, please. So we go to PetSmart. And we walk in, and there's a little enclosure with a hamster in it. And he's in this little like cove, and he's peeking out like this. You can barely even see him. And I'm like, see, Israel, that's what you're going to see the whole time. It's going to be super boring, and you're going to get tired of it. And I'm just like kind of trying to discourage him. And then we go around to the other side, and there's another hamster enclosure on the other side. And on that side, there's this little hamster in a wheel. And he's like this, and he looks so happy. I mean, he's just like running. And then we come over, and he literally goes like this. He's like running, and he goes, and he locks, I'm kidding you not, he locks eyes with me. And we stared at each other for like 5 seconds, and I'm like, he's the one. We're getting him. And so Israel got a hamster that day. And we still lock eyes sometimes. It's crazy. It's like he's reading my mind. Okay, so this hamster, we got a typewriter and we got a hamster. What does this all mean? Okay, I'm going to bring it back. So remember, we're talking about what it takes for something to be information. And information comes from an intelligent source, usually. So for something to be information, it has to be 2 things. It has to be highly complex, and it also has to be specified, okay? So let's say this hamster, I put a piece of paper in my typewriter, and our super amazing hamster gets on there, and he types out JFIELA semicolon DL9 JGM semicolon ASDF JK. Okay, so he types this out, and I take it out. I'm like, look how smart our hamster is. Okay, that had no complexity. It was just random numbers, right? I mean, there was complexity because it was a whole bunch of random numbers. But there was no specification. What is my hamster trying to tell me? I don't know. And probably nothing, because he's just trying to get moved around and he's accidentally hitting the keys, right? So he's probably not really telling me anything. But what if I put him on there and he types out QW, 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 QW? Okay, so this is slightly specified, right? It kind of has like a code or something to it, but it's not very complex. And what is he trying to tell me? I don't know. Because, again, he's probably not trying to tell me anything. But what if my hamster gets on the typewriter and he gets his little paws? They're so cute, by the way, his little tiny paws. Oh my gosh. I look at him sometimes and I'm like, how does God do this? You know, like, it's incredible. Okay, so he gets on the typewriter and he types out, God is good. Whoa. okay, my mind is blown if he does that, because one, either this hamster is crazy genius or God is speaking to me through a hamster, you know? Either one of those is awesome. But for him to print out God is good, that is specified, right? And it's also complex. Boom, that speaks of intelligent design, because it aligns with something I already know called the language of English. It's an already set up thing that I understand, and he just spoke in my language, right? So that would tell me that there's some sort of intelligence in my hamster. Well, Israel's hamster. But that doesn't really happen, right? Okay, so let me break this down for you real quick here. See what I got. Okay, look at my little chromosome. Cute. Okay, so you guys saw a gene. A gene is like this, okay? So we're gonna zoom into that a little bit. Oh no, my little tags are coming off. And we're gonna see that this, where is it? Sorry, I'm trying to find all my little tags that I had on here. Okay, these three code for an amino acid called proline. So anytime you have these three bases together, you get a proline. Anytime you have these three bases together, you get a threonine, something like that. And it goes on and on. If you put GTT together, you get valine. If you put TGT together, you get cysteine. Okay, so what are you seeing in this? Within DNA, you have a code that is then read by RNA polymerase and is transcribed, and you get an amino acid from that. So what's happening here? There is coding in this that is very complex, but is also very specified. Because if you mess up one of these, like let's say you take that one off, it throws off the rest of the sequences. So this is very specified, but you also get something out of it. So DNA itself speaks of intelligence, okay? From what people who are looking for extraterrestrial activity out there, they're looking for intelligence out there in space. If they would just go deeper inside, they would find intelligence written into the code of who you are. That's so cool. So some of the things that DNA does. So how is DNA evidence for a designer? One, DNA has all requirements to have come from an intelligent source. It has everything it needs to say, yep, something intelligent made this, okay? Some of the proteins that DNA make are like antibodies. Antibodies bind to specific particles and like viruses and bacteria and help protect your body. Enzymes in your body, messengers like hormones, are proteins that are created from DNA. Structural components, so like cells in your hair and things like that. So all kinds of things. Like basically everything your body does, DNA makes that happen. It's pretty phenomenal. Okay, so first, number one, it fulfills all requirements to come from an intelligent designer. Number two, your DNA has dual usage words in the DNA language. So these three, this is called, where did I put that? Where did I put it? Oh, I left them up here. So three like this is called a codon. And those are like little words in your DNA. And every one of these 3 billion, right? And you have a codon that's made up of 3. Codons don't just encode for an amino acid. They sometimes also determine how fast or slow the encoding happens, because as you encode, the protein also has to take on the right shape, because if it doesn't take on the right shape, then it's not going to function properly. So a certain codon will cause the DNA transcription to pause long enough for the protein to finish assembling and getting into the proper 3D order, and then it will continue going. So for evolutionarily speaking, for something like this to evolve 2 dual uses is very slim to impossible. Because things don't usually, you don't usually evolve dual uses. It's like as if I knew an English word and that English word meant something different in French. But I used both of those, and both of those things were what I was trying to say. Okay, so it's very complex to have dual usage for something. Very, very difficult for that to have evolved. Okay, 3, why DNA points to a designer. DNA has built in within itself pre-adaptation features. Pre-adaptation features. Okay, so in 2017, there was a research done. It was called Dynamic Gene Expression Response to Altered Gravity in Human T Cells. Okay, altered gravity. That's essentially talking about humans going into space. What happens to your genes when humans go into space? Because we've never been outside of a gravity before, like in space, you don't have gravity. You have altered gravity there. Here, you have gravity. So what happens to your cells when they're in an environment they've never been in before? Because I'm pretty sure, evolutionarily speaking, we never were like out in space, like life just living out there in space, right? So this is what they say. Quote, we identified 3 gravity-regulated genes which could be cross-validated in both completely independent experiment missions. They found 3 gravity-related genes. How would you have gravity-related genes if you've never been to space before? These are pre-adaptation features in DNA. So number 4, adaptation, not mutations, are what drives us forward. See, for years and years, they've told us, evolutionarily speaking, that survival of the fittest, natural selection, and mutations are what drives us forward. You die if you're not good enough, strong enough, whatever. And then if you get a positive mutation, then that's how we begin to evolve into something better. So we can only do that through lots of death, though, because you could have a positive mutation, but it not be in your genetic code to pass along. So if you can't pass it on, you might have and mutations that are positive are like 1 in a trillion. I mean, there's not very many of them at all. Yeah, there's like none. So statistically speaking, we've never actually found a positive mutation. There is actually, in viruses, sometimes there's things, but because viruses are so tiny and they're not really cells. Okay, that's a whole different topic. I'm not going to get into that. But for the most part, mutations are not positive. But they always thought mutations are what drives evolution forward. Well, what they're finding is adaptation is actually what helps you to adapt to adaptation, is what helps you survive. And that actually has more to do with something called epigenetics than it does with mutation. So epigenetics, epi means above, and genetics obviously means like your DNA. So they have found that you've got your DNA, but it's not just this. This is not like this. It's actually wound up very tightly like this. So to be able to read this, it has to be unwound and it has to be taken apart so that it can actually be read. Okay? So if it doesn't get taken apart properly, then you can't read that and you can't produce the protein or whatever it is from that if you can't unwind it. So what they found is, depending on your environment, they did this study with rats. You know what baby rats are called? Pups. So cute, isn't it? So they did a study. Let me see. It was in 2004. It was called Epigenetic Programming by Maternal Behavior. And I think some kids need some candy. Do you want some candy? You want some too? Oh, I almost hit your head. Oh man, oh, sorry. This is what keeps them alive when I'm talking about science. Travis, I thought I already gave you one. Oh, I gave it to Jim, sorry. Okay, only thing though, guys, don't eat your candy right now, because this candy has like red 40 in it, which is gonna make you hyperactive. So don't eat it yet, wait until afterwards. Do you want this? Oh, yes. Anybody else? Okay. You back there, Lily. Okay, Terrell, I'm gonna aim for you so I don't hit anybody else. Oh, there's a lot of, okay, Benny. Oh, that's for you, Benny. Oh, sorry, Larry. I missed you though. Okay. Yeah, you're still alive. Okay, so back to epigenetic programming by maternal behavior. So they found that some mother rats lick and groom their pups a lot. And some mother rats don't lick or groom their pups at all. And they found from this that as those pups grew up, the ones that didn't get licked and groomed very much, they didn't lick and groom their pups very much either, and that they had higher levels of stress. Okay? So then you come over to this rat over here that licks and grooms her pups a lot, and her rats grew up and they became mothers that licked and groomed their pups a lot. So it was genetic, and their rat, the offspring on this side, had lower stress levels. Okay? So they thought, I wonder what would happen if we have foster rats. So they took the pups from this group and they gave them to this group, and they took the pups from this group and they gave them to this group. And they watched what happened. So what do they call it? It's funny. They call it licking and grooming and arch-back nursing. They're like with a little microscope looking at, okay. And then the ones that don't do that. So the high licking and grooming group, they got the low licking and grooming pups that were genetically set up to be low lickers and groomers themselves, and vice versa. And then they grew up. These baby rats went off and went to college. And what they found was when those baby rats grew up and had babies, this group ended up being mothers that licked and groomed their pups, which was exactly opposite of what they expected to see, because the DNA was that they would be low lickers and groomers. Okay? So I'm getting somewhere with this. Don't lose me. So what they found from this discovery is that DNA can be modified. Your genes can be turned off and on depending on your environment and what you think about your environment. Because the reality is, for rats that are low lickers and groomers, their environment probably at some point in time was much more harsh because they didn't have time to lick and groom their pups. And so these pups grew up to know that their environment is going to be harsh. And so they better get with it. This is why it's also important to really nurture your kids when they're young. because it sets them up for success as adults. But that's just aside. So, but what they were doing for them is that you got really harsh environment, so we're not going to lick and groom you, and then you're going to be more prepared. You're going to have higher stress levels, which will allow for you to survive better because you're expecting the worst. Okay? So it's a survival mechanism. Does that make sense? So built into the DNA, there's something called, they found that this was all caused by something they called methylation. So just to give you an example of what that is, you got DNA here, you got this methylated, so it can't be read. That's basically what it is. So it just keeps the DNA from being read, or it acts like a bookmark where it's like, read me, and it becomes a point that is read a lot. But depending on the methylation, some genes are either expressed or not expressed. It can stop your genes from looking a certain way. So the great thing about this was they also found out that it can be reversed. So all of the things in your genes that, this is what I hear people say all the time. Well, it's just who I am. It's just who I am. It's just how I am. You know, God wouldn't want to change me. Yeah, actually he would. And he actually built it into your DNA already. But it's going to take you a step of faith, like it took us going into space before we knew that we had gene expression that would allow for us to adapt to space. We couldn't know that until we went there. So, adaptation through epigenetics, not mutation, is actually what drives us forward. And that is actually a sign of a great and good God, a great and good designer. Because inside of our genetics, he has placed everything that we need to be able to adapt. If we have a harsh environment, this is a rat example, but everything can be related here. So even in this situation, you have a harsh environment, you're going to be able to survive better if you have higher stress levels. You have a low stress environment, and your mom licks and nurtures you a lot, then, because she's got time to do that, then you're going to grow up thinking the world's a great place because it's a little bit better for you. And maybe a lot of that is just in our mind, and maybe some of that is in our genes and we just don't realize it. And we need to rewrite that because we have the power to do that through our thinking. So, conclusion. The rat pup's environment affected the expression of their DNA, which made them better able to survive in the environment they were in. God is a good God. He put adaptation right into your genes so that you would have the best possibility of surviving. That's awesome, right? Okay, so DNA itself points to an intelligent designer. It is highly complex, highly specified information with built-in dual usage language, pre-adaptation, which they also called forward-thinking design, and adaptation built into it. That's pretty fantastic. So, what does DNA say about its designer? Anybody? I have candy. Pamela, do you have something? What does DNA say about the designer? If you looked at something like this, yes. Oh, sorry, Zach. Actually, here, Zach, you can have one too. You didn't get one yet. That is absolutely correct. He is highly intelligent beyond our understanding. Isaiah 55:9 says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. What else? What else does this say, Dave?
2 Peter 1:4, I think it is, or 3. He gives us all we need for life and godliness.
Yes. He's built into us everything that we need. That is awesome, right? Yes. Okay, here. Yes, he is a loving God. John 3:16 tells us that. He is a loving God. You know what else I saw? Jeremiah 29:11. He's got good plans for us. Built into our DNA, he's got good plans for us. You know what else I saw? He's prepared for you and every path you could possibly take. He has already prepared for it. He has already prepared for you to go into space. Did you know that? He didn't just give the guys that went to space this DNA with the ability for the genes to express themselves differently in order to handle the change in gravitational pull. No, he gave that to all of us. Guess what? God wants us all to go to space. His limitations on us are nothing like the limitations we put on ourselves. He's like unlimited. He's like, yeah, let's ride into that, the ability to fly through space. You know, like that's crazy. But he knew, yeah. He prepared for us for every path. He's got it covered. 1 Corinthians 2:9, it says, eye has not seen nor ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for them that love him. And then the last thing that I saw, he can take things that people say serve one purpose and give them a different purpose. Dual purpose. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. All right. So lastly, what does DNA say about us? First, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. 20 to 30 trillion cells, each one of them containing a nucleus, each one of them containing over 6 feet of DNA. That DNA contains over 3 billion base pairs. And of those 3 billion base pairs, there's over how many codons? And those codons all encode for something in us that we don't even necessarily even know yet in every one of our cells. Yes, absolutely. Psalm 139:14 says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Number 2, what does DNA say about us? Faith is built into our very DNA. The moment a human being stepped into an altered gravity environment, their gene expression started to change to adapt for that. Our limitations are often just a mirage. If I don't see it right in front of me, it's probably not going to happen. I can't, God says to love everybody, but I just can't do it. God says to do this, but I just can't do it. We limit ourselves because we don't take that step of faith into space for our genes to actually kick in. It's already built into us. Faith is already built into our DNA. 3, we were made in the likeness of our designer. I love this. You know what I find so interesting? They're saying all this stuff like DNA is the most amazing computer design ever, or computer software and all of this stuff. You know, when we discovered computers, when we created computers, the first computer invented was in 1936. DNA was discovered in 1953. We made computer software before we knew about DNA. There was something in us that said, I think this could work this way. And so we tried it. And in 1953, we made the first computer. And then in 1953, and then in 1936, we made the first computer. And then in 1953, we discovered the most sophisticated computer program in the universe. Isn't that interesting? Because see, to me, it would make sense if we found DNA first and we're like, oh, this is cool, let's build this. But we didn't. It was the other way around. Not that we were anywhere close to DNA, but we had something built into us to create software that is very similar to what has already been built into us through our Heavenly Father. It is in our very DNA to act like our Father. Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. DNA. All right, and then the fourth thing, what does DNA say about us? What DNA says about us, and I think we already touched on this, is that we are very loved by our designer. You think about you think about a car that has air conditioning and heating. During the summer, some people might say, why do you have why do you need heat? You don't need heat. Get rid of that. But God was so good, he built in heater and air conditioner. Because he designed it that way because he knew you might need this at some point. And so even though you don't need it right now, I'm going to build it into you so that when you do need it, it's there. I like how people use that scripture, well, God will never give you more than you can handle. It's not a scripture. It comes from 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, no temptation is taking you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful and not suffer you to be tempted above that which you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape that you might be able to bear it. And so what it's basically saying is he'll always give you a way of an escape if something is too much for you. And so we interpret that to mean, well, God will never give you more than you can bear. You know what? God gives us more than we can bear all the time so that in our weakness, he can be made strong. So that in the midst of that, he can be like, doop, doop, doop. Let's turn on a couple more genes here. Boop, boop. Let's turn those ones off. Look at you. You look more like Jesus every day. I love this. Philippians 3:10. I want to read this in the classical amplified. There's so many different, there's like the NIV from 1984 and the new NIV and the amplified, the classical amplified. So this is apparently the classified amplified. So I'll read it from here because it says, for my determined purpose is that I may know him, that I may progressively become more deeply and intimately acquainted with him, perceiving and recognizing and understanding the wonders of his person more strongly and more clearly, and that I may in that same way come to know the power overflowing from his resurrection, which it exerts over believers, and that I may so share his sufferings as to be continually transformed in spirit into his likeness, even to his death. That's a lot. But essentially what it's saying is that we might know him. See, God did all of this. He shows us stuff. He puts things inside of us so that we can understand him and know him. And you know, we were made in God's image, right? Image and likeness, Genesis 1:27. But then he loved us so much that he was made in our likeness and image. Because you know, it's very hard to understand something that is outside of your universe. So he came into our universe and took on our DNA so that he could show us who he really was, and so that we could actually have relationship with him. That is the God that created our DNA. The very essence of who we are is completely tied up in who he is. And the more we know that and the more we understand that, the more we become who we were meant to be, because we were meant to be in his image and in his likeness. Amen? So DNA is evidence for intelligent design. And it tells of a very good God, a very good designer that loves us and has plans and purposes for our life beyond what we even know. But it requires that we step out in faith sometimes. It requires that we say, okay, I'll go to space. We'll see what happens. God, you said go to space? Okay, I'll go to space. I don't know how that's going to handle with my intestines and stuff and my digestive system. You know, how does all that work? Because everything about our bodies functions off gravity, if you think about it. That's a big issue when they first went to space. But God's like, I got it covered. I already wrote that into your DNA. You're good. God is a good God. When we operate off of that premise, let me show you something. When we operate off the premise that God is a good God, we step over to this side where we're nurtured and where we're loved. And you know what? The world's just a little better of a place. We're not so stressed out anymore because we know that our hands are in a good, faithful God. We don't have to be over here stressing out and suffering and you know, just at our wits' end all the time. We can be over here trusting and knowing that we have a God that is beyond our understanding, so intelligent, far beyond our understanding, that he can take every little bit of the fabric of my life and mend it together in a beautiful tapestry, a beautiful masterpiece. And he doesn't have to miss one part of that because he knows how to take things and give them dual usages. He knows how to take things that are broken and ugly and distorted and methylated, and he can bring beautiful things out of that. Far beyond what I could ever do if I keep it in my hands. But if you put it in his hands and you say, okay, God, nurture me, love me, because that's ultimately what made the difference for even rats. Even rats respond to love. Love can change your DNA, but not human love, God's love. And when you let him love you, you know what? If those pups were always running away, it's pretty hard to go get a pup and bring it back and lick it at the same time. You know, if you're spending all your time trying to go after a lost sheep, you're not going to have as much time nurturing it and cuddling it and that kind of stuff. But if that sheep, if that pup just stays with its mother and the mom doesn't have to chase after it all the time, then the mom can nurture it and lick it and whatever that other thing was, back nurse it or something like that. Yeah. I don't know what that is, but listen, guys, this is about positioning ourselves in a place where we can allow for God to do the work in us, where we allow for him because we know that he is intelligent enough, we know that he is good enough, that we will say, okay, I surrender. That song that we sang, the very end, it's so good. If you gladly chose surrender, so did I. So will I. And that's ultimately what Jesus came to show us. Did Jesus need to surrender? I mean, he was the God of the universe. No. But what he did was he showed us how to. That we could. That God was trustworthy enough. That even to the point of death, even beyond death, he was still true to his word. And he defied death because his word is more powerful than death. So how many of us need that kind of faith sparked in us, where we understand and we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that even to death, we can trust God? That even to death, we can take all these things in our hands and we can give them to God. because he is a good God. And that is what even the fabric of who we are tells us. Amen.